Wall Street closes mixed, but futures rise ahead of the release of the February CPI inflation print. Stocks in the Asia-Pacific trade largely higher, with Japanese Nikkei underperforming, while the GIFT Nifty suggesting a flat start for the Indian market. Brent crude trades in a range around $82 a barrel ahead of global crude outlook reports from the OPEC and International Energy Agency this week. Cryptocurrencies continue to rally, with Bitcoin hitting record highs above $72,000. A CNBC TV 18 poll sees CPI for the month of February unchanged at 5.1%, but uptick in food prices may cause retail inflation to remain above the January level. Meanwhile, factory output for January is seen at a little over 4%. The board of Aditya Birla Capital approves the merger of Aditya Birla Finance with itself, subject to regulatory approvals. The move will convert Aditya Birla Capital from a holding company to an operating NBFC. Birla Group becomes the first large conglomerate to comply with the scale-based RBI regulations for non-banking financial companies. 4 years after it was passed by the Parliament, the Union government notifies the rules for the Citizenship Amendment Act. The law aims to give Indian citizenship to Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi and Christian immigrants from Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan if they enter India before December 31, 2014. The law won't apply to certain areas in the northeast. Good morning in the Mumbai News Center. I'm Sonal Bhutra. You're watching Power Breakfast. Those are the top headlines which we'll discuss in greater detail. But as always, first up, let's take a look at the Asian markets. It was a mixed handover from Wall Street that we got, and the Asian markets are also quite mixed right now. There's a lot of action which is happening in the Japanese markets. The corporate inflation has beaten expectations. However, Nikkei is lower. We are seeing cuts of around 1% on the Nikkei, and it continues to see a downfall. It was down around 2% yesterday and another 1.1% right now. The Taiwanese index and the Hang Seng, though, they are doing well. So the Hang Seng, that one is up around 0.7%. We have the Taiwanese index sitting with gains of 0.2%. And if we look at the GIFT Nifty, that is the one which will indicate the moves for our own markets. It is up around 30-odd points if we compare it with Nifty futures. So that's what the implied open is suggesting right now, in the green of around 30-odd points. Let's talk about the US markets now, because Wall Street ended Monday's trading session mixed. The Dow closed with a gain of nearly 50 points, while the S&P closed 0.1% lower. The tech-heavy Nasdaq Composite also shed 65 points. CNBC's Steve Kowak gets us a wrap of all the action on Wall Street.
U.S. markets were little changed across the major indexes Monday as investors wait on the latest CPI number, a key read on inflation due out Tuesday morning. The Dow was up 47 points, the S&P 500 down 6 points, and the tech-heavy Nasdaq down 66 points. The Biden administration proposed a 2025 budget today totaling $7.26 trillion. That's up from last year. The budget devotes more funds to Social Security and child care costs, as well as small business loans. And it includes $900 billion in defense spending. The White House also expects to raise about $5.5 trillion, due in part from proposed tax hikes on corporations and the wealthy. Reddit plans to raise up to $748 million in its upcoming IPO in the New York Stock Exchange. In a filing released today, the social media platform said that about 22 million shares will be sold between $31 to $34 a share, targeting a market cap of almost $6.5 billion. Reddit's upcoming IPO is the first major tech launch this year.
And let's stay with the U.S. markets. Let's listen into some important outlook coming in from Bob Dole, who's the Chief Investment Officer of Crossmark Global Investments.
The market at 21 times earning is priced for some really good news. And I'm not sure if we can have all the good news. Fed's going to cut a bunch, at least 3 times. Earnings are going to grow double digits. Do those two things hang together? I'm not so sure. Pricing power isn't what it was. Some cost pressures. I think we're going to see more wage growth pressures. I don't see how we get the inflation rate below 3. Obviously, the number we're likely to see this week is going to be a 4 handle. Maybe it comes down some, but nowhere near the 2 the Fed expects.
Okay, all right, that's the global market action and opinion as well. But how will these cues impact our own markets? We have a research team joining in to tell you just that. What's the trade setup looking like? The stocks that'll be in the news and the action from the F&O space as well. Hey guys, a very good morning to both of you. Sudarshan, let me come across to you first up. A lot of cues that we have to look out for.
Morning, Sona. Well, it looks like all the money is moving just in one direction. And it's not equities, it's cryptos. The leading crypto, Bitcoin, is at a record high and is now trading above $72,000 for the very first time. On equities front, it's all calm ahead of the inflation data. US markets saw a trade in a range with largely a negative bias. But we can't say the same for our market. It was a weak day of trade on Monday. All the sectoral indices posted losses, with metals, media and PSU Bank falling the most. Headline indices too saw a fall in line with all the sectoral indices. Nifty, which was at a record high in the opening trade, closed at day's low. But major weakness was seen in the banking space, and that led to Nifty Bank closing with a cut of more than 1%. And except AU Small Fin Bank, all its constituents closed in the red, with ICICI Bank, HDFC and SBI being top drags. And for today too, GIFT Nifty is indicating a subdued start. On institutional front, we had buy numbers from both FIs and DIs, but it was largely because of Indigo block days. Lastly, in the Qs to watch, we have US CPI for the month of February. Estimate is at 3.1% year-on-year and 0.3% month-on-month. We have India's CPI for February. CNBC T18 poll estimates 5.12%, which is unchanged against January print. And lastly, IIP for January, CNBC T18 poll estimates growth of 4% against 3.8% in December 2023.
Okay, a lot of macro data that we'll be watching out for. Thank you, Sudarshan, for the gist. But let's talk about the stocks that will be in focus as well. Vamakshi is joining us with that list now. Hey, good morning, Vamakshi.
Hi, good morning, Sona. Let me first start off with ITC. Now, a report from Bloomberg is suggesting that British American Tobacco, or BAT, is planning on launching ITC share sale as soon as this week. They're planning to offload stake in ITC worth almost $2 to $3 billion. So definitely that will be an important stock to watch out for. But other than that, also focus in on Indigo. This is a CNBC TV18 newsbreak confirmed. Block deal data shows that Rakesh Kangwal, who is the promoter of Indigo, sold 5.8% equity for 6,785 crores. Now, the average price for this block deal is at 3,015 rupees per share, which surpasses the floor price by almost 3%. Now, post this stake sale, Rakesh Gangwal now holds 19.2% stake in the company, and in fact, Morgan Stanley Asia was one of the buyers in the block deal. Apart from that, keep an eye out on Aurobindo Pharma. Its arm, APL Healthcare's formulation manufacturing facility in Andhra Pradesh, has received the WHO GMP approval. Aditya Birla Capital is another one that we will be watching out for, and that is because the company has announced the merger of its wholly owned subsidiary Aditya Birla Finance with itself, and this has been done in order to comply with RBI's mandate on scale-based regulations. HIL is the next one in focus after the company has signed an agreement with Crestia Polytech for the acquisition of Topline, which is a popular brand of pipes and fittings, and this has been done at an enterprise value of 265 crores. And in fact, the company is also expected to acquire Crestia's four wholly owned subsidiaries as well. Watch out for Wokhard as well. European Journal reports case where WCK 5222 was used successfully. And lastly, let's also focus in on RVNL. It has emerged as the lowest bidder for two projects worth almost 47 crore and 339 crores.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Vamakshi, for joining us with that list. Let's do one thing. Let's go across to Nigel now. He's joining in all the cues from the FNO space this morning. Hey, Nigel.
Well, yesterday, actually, Sonal wasn't a great trading session. We ended at the low point of the day, but no big fear, actually, in terms of flows. It appears more that there was some unwinding of positions, on the headline index itself. So the Nifty and the Nifty Bank, both of them had unwinding of positions. How are the FIs positioned? Well, 59% of their positions are on the short side. And in terms of contracts, the net short contracts are at around 35,000 contracts. So no extreme of any sort on the net short positioning. On the Nifty options data, the call writers are feeling good. 22,500 call, 22,400 call, the aggressive writing being seen out there. Between both those two strikes, there are more than 70 lakh shares getting added there. So the bears are feeling that they can have this covered at around 22,500, 22,550. And even after this aggressive call writing, the PCR is still a distance from that bottoming out process, because normally we say that the PCR bottoms out at around that 0.65, 0.7. That's where you see a bit of a bounce. It's still some distance because it's at around 0.94 odd. The Nifty levels to track. Support is at around the 22,000 odd mark. If you're looking at the near-term support, well, you'll want to pull in the 20 DMA, which is at around 22,150, while resistance comes in at around 22,560. Last few sessions, we have gone to 22,500 odd, but we couldn't conquer that mark. And I pointed out 22,560 because the 22,500 call premium yesterday was at around 60 rupees odd. Two stocks I'm going to be tracking very closely. ITC, there's that overhang with regard to how much BAT wants to sell and by when they want to sell. So that's going to be an overhang on the stock. So that could be one of the stocks that will drag. It has only around 4% weightage on the index, but keep an eye out on that one. And Reliance Industries, what we have been seeing in the last 12 months or so is that when the bulls are in trouble, they turn to Reliance Industries. The weightage on the index is around 10%. So let's see at some point of time if you get that dip, whether or not Reliance comes in there and again bats for the bulls. Back to you.
Okay, all right. Thank you guys for joining us. So that is the trade setup for the day. We'll do one thing. We'll slip into a break. When we return, the board of Aditya Birla Capital approves the merger of Aditya Birla Finance with itself. We'll get you more on that when we come back. Welcome back. You're still tuned into Power Breakfast. It's time to focus on some important macros now. The February CPI and the January IIP data are expected later today. Retail inflation is seen unchanged at 5.12% in February versus 5.1% in January. Uptick in some food prices may lead to the inflation print in February to not fall below the level seen in January. Now, core inflation is seen steady at a range of 3.4 to 3.6%. Meanwhile, IIP for the month of January is seen at 4.01% versus 3.8% in the month of December. With that, let's move on because the Birla Group has become the first large conglomerate to convert its holding company into an operating NBFC. Aditya Birla Capital will merge Aditya Birla Finance with itself. Ritu Seng is here to explain how this amalgamation will ensure compliance with the RBI rules. Ritu.
That's right. The board of Aditya Birla Capital has approved the amalgamation of its wholly owned subsidiary, Aditya Birla Finance, with itself, creating a large unified operating NBFC, which would then be in compliance with RBI's scale-based regulations, which require that Aditya Birla Finance get publicly listed no later than the end of September 2025. So this announcement is coming a good 18 months ahead of that deadline. But of course, this will be subject to various approvals from the NCLT, RBI, SEBI, etc. before we actually see the amalgamation happen. Now, Aditya Birla Capital is a listed entity which operates as the holding company, and within its structure, it has Aditya Birla Finance, a wholly owned subsidiary, which functions as a systemically important non-deposit taking NBFC. After the amalgamation, Aditya Birla Capital gets converted from this holding company to an operating NBFC. Now, also after this, Vishakha Mulye is going to assume the role of the MD and CEO, and Rakesh Singh will become the Executive Director and CEO NBFC of the merged entity. Now, broadly, the objective is to simplify the group structure through this move, to ensure that there is more optimal and efficient utilization of capital, and there is consolidation of business and, of course, compliance with RBI norms as well. So while Aditya Birla is going to be able to comply with the upper layer NBFC listing rules after this, the focus now actually shifts to Tata Sons, which also falls within the same category and is now understood to be weighing its options to comply with the directions without necessarily getting itself listed. Of course, the final word on the matter will rest with RBI.
Okay, all right, Ritu, thank you so much for joining us with all those details. Moving on to some opinion now. Citi remains positive on India's gas story, and within that space, they are buyers of oil marketing companies. Earlier, my colleagues Nimesh and Prashant caught up with Saurabh Handa, who is the research analyst at Citi Research, from the sidelines of the Citi Investor Conference and discussed his views on the oil and gas sector. Listen in.
Structurally, we are positive on the gas story in India. We have, done detailed reports on how the overall demand CAGR for gas in India could go up to almost 7% over the next few years. And then it trickles down to some of these companies. At this point of time, GAIL is one of our only buys in the gas space. We do still have a buy on IGL, which is a city gas company. But there, actually, what has happened is IGL has, gotten derated because of the EV risk in Delhi. In a way, at this point of time, valuations were where we were not very comfortable. But yeah, city gas also will be an interesting play. We are still positive on the OMCs. The government has announced a cut in domestic LPG prices, which maybe increases the under-recoveries for them in the near term. But then there's a bit of seasonality in LPG. Typically, international prices come down in the summer. So we are not particularly worried on that front. Petrol and diesel is what typically hogs the limelight. That one is in general, before elections, there is a concern that maybe prices could get cut. Secondly, after the CGD action, there was a view that could this be extrapolated to the OMCs. We disagree. We think the cases are quite different. In the CGDs, there is a question of getting priority allocation of cheap gas, which the OMCs do not really enjoy. There's a question of exclusivity, which again in the OMCs is not the case. I would say OMCs have by and large been fairly disciplined on pricing. We still remain positive. What I think people tend to forget is that you can have good years and bad years in the OMC space, but over like a 10-year period, stocks like BPCL, HPCL have given you 20% plus ROEs. The stocks are still trading at 1.7, 1.8 times. So we are still quite comfortable on valuations. Yes, there can be a little bit of election uncertainty. I think the last weekend's events probably suggest that maybe even that uncertainty may not actually play out, because crude prices are not at that level where you can cut petrol, diesel prices. But after 2 weeks, I think things should anyway be clear. So we would be buyers.
And you can catch more of Citi's opinion on stocks and sectors all through the day only on CNBC TV 18. We'll do one thing, we'll slip into a break now. When we come back, as always, we'll talk about the cues from the commodities market. So stay tuned for that. Welcome back. You're still tuned into Power Breakfast. Well, Manisha Gupta is joining us with all the update from the commodity space and a lot of action happening there, Manisha.
Well, absolutely. And before I go to commodities, I do want to say on what's happening with cryptocurrencies, because Bitcoin now is at yet another all-time high above 72,000. This comes in after the UK regulator has now removed objections to crypto-based ETNs, and we have seen more institutional push coming in for this space. So very good gains continuing here, and it's good gains continuing for the gold prices also, where we are not too far away from its all-time highs of $2,200 an ounce. The dollar index is still holding at 8-week lows. The markets, of course, are watching out for the U.S. inflation data. Well, that comes in today. And ahead of that, there is some support that we've seen happen for other commodities also. So whether it's about crude oil prices, which are trading in the positive, or copper, which is trading at a 5-week highs, even nickel is trading at 1-month highs right now. So strong support across commodities is how we've opened Asia today with.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Manisha, for joining us with those updates. And that's all we have on Power Breakfast today. Stay tuned. Bazaar Morning Call comes up next.